You wanted to start this week with questions. Let's get into it.
Before we start, though, I need to do a shout out to Cypher, who supplied my coffee today. As I'm off Starbucks and Costa, I got fed up of drinking rubbishy coffee, so I'm now onto Cypher, who's a local roastery, and it's amazing. Definitely recommend it.
Where is it?
No, it's not on it. This is just a thermos. It's
okay,
inside.
okay. Is it a chain? Is it a chain?
No, it's a little roastery in Dubai called Cypher. Cypher.
Okay. I've been ordering instant espresso from Espresso Lab. It's quite expensive, but it's super cool because most of the time I think of like instant coffee as like Americanos.
Yeah, okay.
And I guess this is made to be espresso, so you just add whatever it is, 50 milliliters of water or something.
Okay.
I don't know. It's pretty good. It's pretty cool. I've been getting so much more into instant coffee because when I travel, you don't always know if you're going to get decent coffee. I always bring my own coffee. Some of it is the single serving pour over coffee.
Oh, so they sent me some of that, which I will never use, so I'll give it
really?
to you.
Why don't you like that?
I don't like drip coffee at all. I only drink espressos and espressos with milk and stuff in.
There is, it's like a ritual or routine for me in the morning where I feel, especially when you're on the road, just you have your pour over coffee. It's, I don't know. For me, it's nice, especially when you're traveling places that only have the, what is it, like the Nescafe type of things. And then you break out your own coffee and you're like, this is needed. This is important to have in the morning. Okay, but
so I did have a few
questions. Getting to the questions. Yes.
So we just done a great conversation with Steve, which touched on a few things I think we can unpack a little bit. One of the ones was around how things are changing at the moment with the advent of AI and how it's impacting organisations. There's been a couple of announcements this week. I saw a couple from big Australian telcos, I think Telstra and I want to see Optus, who both said that they're going to make large cuts to their workforce because of AI, because of efficiency optimization. I think one of them is doing it now and one of them is projecting it. So for all that we say that the human in the loop is really needed, right now there's a bit of a knee-jerk reaction to say we've got this technology, we're going to cut our workforce and save some costs.
Do you think that's actually based on the technology, or do you think that's a reason for companies to clean house?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's an excuse
a little bit of both.
Yeah, I think it's probably a bit of both. I think there's the promise of AI, I think, is making people think that they don't need people so they can get away with it. And I think that will correct in time. But given that, what is the right answer for the balance? So if we need to make changes to the organization, how do we retain engagement on the workforce? And how do we help people feel secure in their jobs? Given that everybody's feeling this sort of threat behind them of the AI machine is coming, how do we make our teams feel more secure in what they're doing?
I wonder is that the right question about how we make people feel secure, or is it about arming people with what they need to be effective in the future? Is that how you bring security to people? I go back to a conversation earlier this week. The hardest part of transformation is going to be unlearning. It's not reskilling or upskilling. It's not the ability to add something to what you have, but it is to say what I have may not be the right foundation that I have built, let's say a career on or a process or a methodology on, and I need to unlearn these things. For me, the ability to feel safe is then the ability to say, what do I need to transform? What do I need to unlearn? What do I need to relearn? So it is helping people navigate that sort of change.
Yeah, okay. So I have an advantage because I've seen these questions.
But tell me, I'm curious.
What I was thinking as I thought about that was, I think it comes down to the difference between value versus tasks. As consultants, a lot of what we do for our clients is focus on business outcomes. How can we achieve certain results, certain KPIs, or help our business clients achieve those KPIs for their strategy? And I think it comes down to the same thing for individuals. So I think a lot of people have got jobs which are created around doing certain tasks. We talked about data analysis, or we talked about maybe creating wireframes or creating visual designs. And I think we need to get away from that task creation, because we are, as humans, capitalist humans, always going to look for ways to streamline tasks, make them more efficient to do the same thing, and focus more on what's the value that you add to an organization. And it could be that some of it is task-oriented at the moment, but some of it is a lot about how you connect those tasks and how you direct them.
I'll break that down into two ways. First, I think you're supporting what I said, that we tend to think and operate in one way, and our ability to stay relevant will be through the ability to unlearn those systems and relearn that. So we unlearn that it is about task completion. It is more about value creation. So that's the first part. The second thing, I was having some conversations in the comments on LinkedIn, and I was saying, I don't think AI is coming for people's jobs as much as we think. And the feedback that I got was, oh, but in a few years, you'll just need one person to do what 10 people were doing. Yes, that's correct. But at the same time, if I look at the world that is opening up, the sort of skill of designing a personality or designing what an agent experience will look like, or what a conversational experience will look like, or an augmented reality experience, or a voice experience, I think there is a lot more jobs and work. So part of it is reskilling, upskilling. Part of it is the ability to unlearn things. I think at the front of all of this is just the ability to say, I need to be agile and flexible.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I think it is. I like them. I obviously like it because it was my answer, but I like the task-oriented view because I think you're right that to survive in this world of change that we're going through at the moment, AI is coming for task automation. So if your job is built around a task, your job will get eaten up and swallowed up unless you find another task which becomes more relevant. Like prompt engineering, for example. You could learn, so I don't want to do wireframe design anymore because an AI can now generate wireframes, and it does a mediocre job of it, does a reasonable job of it. But actually my focus becomes around how can I design a user journey to optimize more conversion in the basket. So rather than doing basket wireframes, I'm very outcome driven then, and it's very much on my ability to join up steps of that journey.
You're going back to something I just started reading, this book Transformed by Marty Kagan. He wrote Inspired. He wrote several other books all around product management. Transformed is all about when companies go through transformation, how they need to embrace a product model, right? So that's not necessarily a sales-driven organization, a business-driven organization. It is about what is the product that you are creating, what's the technology that drives that, what is the vision of that product, and what is the problem that it's solving. Yeah. One of the things he calls out really early in the book is moving from features to problems. Since I've always worked in technology, I've almost always, and technology and user experience, I've almost always thought, what's the problem that we are trying to solve? But as I work with more and more clients from a consulting perspective, you realize most of the world doesn't work like that. They work in terms of, here's the feature that we need. Yeah. Here is, what sales told us a customer wants. So then nobody starts with the problem. They're not starting with the problem. They're just saying, here's what we need based on whatever conversation that I had.
Is it just that they're doing that without you in the room, though? So their strategy team or their CEO or somebody is saying, we have this problem that people are dropping out of the basket before we get to completion, so our sales are lower than they should be. Go and fix that. And someone said, to fix that, we need to do X. Design team, go and build me X.
It could be. I tend to think that most people aren't good with ambiguity, and they want some level of certainty, and therefore speaking in solutions is easier than speaking in problems. Speaking in problems I think gives people heartburn because people want to know that, they're like, I know what to do. I think it takes a relatively confident individual to speak in problems, because that is not about, I know what to do. It's that I know the questions to ask. This is the classic sort of executive thing that you're never going to know everything, but you need to know the questions to ask in order to get the right outcomes. I would just say that, most people aren't comfortable in that, and they want to speak in features because that's easy. And I can go and tell somebody what a feature is to build, but to go and tell somebody a problem, that all of a sudden feels, do I know what I'm talking about? Do I know what needs to happen? Am I comfortable with that? I think there's just, a level of uncertainty that people aren't very good at wrestling with. However, with all the AI tools, we've talked about this before, it's that creative application that becomes so much more important. This has been a long-running theme through the months that we've done this. Normally with designers, you get a problem and then you run right into the tool. You run into Figma to explore that problem, and then you come out with a solution. Looking forward, I think that when you get a problem, you need to dissect that problem. Are we asking the right questions? Do we have the right problem? I tend to think that is where a lot of the value, to your part, is going to sit.
And I think I'd go a step further and say that if we move from features to problems and focus more on outcomes, then everything falls a bit into place. If you know that our objective for this project is to achieve certain outcomes, so for example, so much sales or so many acquisition of new customers, we've got a very distinct and definite frame of what success looks like.
Well, I think that's all about how you empower teams and organizations, right? So as you're going through this transformation with whether it's the age of AI or just getting to be a better company, if you build teams that are empowered through you hire smart people and you tell them what they need to solve, that's almost universally going to get you better results than hiring smart people and telling them what they need to do and telling them the features they need to build. Because most of the time, smart people want a level of autonomy.
Yes.
People who are maybe a little less so are okay with just saying, yep, I'll make that feature and function, boss.
Yeah. Okay, here's a follow-up question to it then, which kind of goes on from that. So if we accept that people are moving from this sort of task-oriented view to being more lateral thinking, focusing more on outcomes, on problem solving, how do you align these teams when the technology is moving faster than their ability to learn it? When the technology changes so fast that maybe we get used to prompt engineering in ChatGPT and then a new LLM comes along and changes everything. How do we get teams to be successful in this?
I'll turn it back to you for a second. Where do you see teams mostly get misaligned at the moment?
Okay. So I think we do get hung up on tools. I think we can hire people who know how to create a Gantt chart and run projects, or we know people who used to know how to use Photoshop and now know how to use Figma. We hire people who know how to develop in Python or React or JavaScript, and I think we need to move away from that. So I think that focus, that single polarized view of I'm a JavaScript developer or I'm a project manager who uses a Microsoft project, that needs to fundamentally and rapidly change, because that's where we're going to see issues.
So what you talked about is all sorts of like how I work.
Yeah.
And I would agree, like this is where a lot of misalignment can come from. What I didn't hear you mention is the team having a common outcome.
Yeah.
And
because I'm saving my answer to come back with that.
To me, when you go back to that question of how do you keep people aligned when all of these tools are changing, they need to know what's the vision. And that actually goes back again to the same book that I'm reading, that book Transformed from Marty Kagan, where the whole idea of moving to a product model is I need to know the vision for what I am creating. I need to know the outcomes. Yeah. So if I pose that question back to you, with all the new tools that are coming out, does it really matter what teams use and how they use it, as much as it matters that they are aligned on what they need to create and the outcomes that they need to produce? So the tools fall by the wayside because everything is changing and there's just this like mass of things happening, but nobody takes their eye off what are we trying to solve in the end and what's the outcome that we need to produce.
It's like we discussed this beforehand. Completely. So I think if we focus on the destination and we focus on an orbit around that destination, the route for how we get there really doesn't matter. I don't care how you produce that beautiful design, whether you do it in Photoshop, in Illustrator, in Figma, if you do it in some weird large language model that's doing for you, I do not care, as long as you get to a destination which is value-oriented, which is outcome-oriented. And I think the orbits will change. I think the routes to get there will continue to evolve. And what will make people successful now is not the steps on that journey. It's about how do you think to get to that outcome.
It goes back to conversations that we've been having before, which is this whole idea that I go to school, I learn all this knowledge to build up this intellect, and I can say I've been in this job for 10 years, for 20 years. I know this knowledge. I have this knowledge built up. But if we look forward, all the AI tools are going to be better at knowledge and have more knowledge than any one of us. Yes. It is our ability to have that creative application of knowledge or to ask the right questions. And I'm saying this and I'm thinking through it out loud because I'm continually going back to one of the themes of this episodic show that we have, which is what is really our role or our position 10 years from now. And I keep going back to the idea that machines operate in certain ways, agents operate in certain ways, humans operate in other ways. And I think this is your words, let humans be humans or let people be people.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of a good metaphor for this. I think the best one I've got at the moment is it's a bit like a carpenter with a box with his toolkit with him. And in his toolkit, he's got nails and he's got screws. He's not going to make the nails and screws himself. That's my equivalent of your AI that's coming along. But he knows which one to use in which circumstance. If you haven't been taught what screws do, what nails do, and how to choose between them, how quickly can you learn that without that 10 years of apprenticeship to get to that point of understanding? I think that's what it gets interesting.
You're talking about mindset, right? And this is what in the last several decades, at least within the technology space, would be called the hacker mindset. Yep. Maybe if you're your age or my age, it might be called MacGyvering something.
Sure.
But the idea that I can take pieces that were created for one reason and I can use them in a completely different way. And that to me is that fundamental idea of where do humans play in the future, where do machines play? It is that creative application of intellect and knowledge. And we just had this wonderful conversation with another coworker of mine that was talking about the future is going to belong to people who are more creative. And that doesn't mean designers, that just means the ability to apply knowledge in unique ways, or as you would say, lateral thinking.
It's a hard one for me because when I started programming, it was mid-90s, and I started with HTML and I moved into JavaScript, and I started as what was derogatory called a script kiddie, where you would cut and paste snippets of JavaScript. You didn't really know what they did. Well, you knew what they did, you didn't know how they worked, and you put it together and somehow you fiddled with it to get the outcome that you wanted. And I progressed on from there to learning JavaScript and knowing it very well, and then having a very good fundamental understanding of that language, and then parked it. I'm now at a position where I'm coming back to it, and it's something akin to that, where you're taking outputs from a large language model when you code. You don't necessarily fully know the language inside and out, enough to know how it works, and you're bolting it together in modules. But do you lose elegance in doing that? Do you lose efficiency? And are you building things in the right way? I would argue now, I'm coming all the way through it again, that it's making me a better coder because I know the questions to ask it. So if we think about that whole foundational knowledge, these deep knowledge trees, which might be a syntax of a language, and then the pillars you build on top of them, which are your ability to understand it and move laterally between things, I think they can be potentially self-reinforced. They can be mutually reinforced, sorry.
I'm thinking, do you know the Stuxnet?
No.
Store? Okay. There is a book called Countdown to Zero Day, I believe. I think it's by Kim Zetter, if I remember correctly. And this is all about the Stuxnet virus. Eventually it was figured out, I believe, that it was done by the US and Israel to take out Iran's nuclear facilities. Okay. And it was a computer virus that, when you read the book, it was done so elegantly in how it had to jump between devices, how the people had to engineer this in such a way that it hid itself until it found the right thing, and it was able to move and sabotage these systems that were air gapped and that were very specific systems. And there was just a level of beauty and elegance. And you see this with hackers. That's why I keep going back to this whole idea of, AI is going to take our jobs. With standard models, right? With standard operating models, as you said at the beginning, anything that can be automated or anything that can be looped, done on repeat, that's done away with. Yeah. However, when I read that book, yes, eventually AI will be able to run billions of different scenarios concurrently. So yes, at some point it will probably come up with the one scenario that will work. I still think we're a ways off from that application of knowledge in a creative way to get a unique outcome. That creativity, as we go back to, and that again, that doesn't have to be a designer, it is just the creative application of knowledge still seems like something so valuable that if I were going to go into schools, into education, how do you start to teach? That is that unlearning, because you realize that my ability to ask questions, creatively apply intellect, all these things are going to be more valuable. The brain is going to sit over here in the partnership with AI, but my ability to apply that brain is still going to be, at least from what I can see for the next 5 to 10 years, unparalleled.
And that's very different to how we currently teach in schools, I think, at the moment. We're
Yeah.
very memory-oriented, learning by rote.
Everything is about building up of knowledge. So I would almost, if I had to look at all the hype at the moment, everything in the news that I'm reading, everything becomes AI is taking our jobs. If I changed that question, I think there is, or there should be, more of a concern that AI erodes and destroys the way that we educate. And education is the actual thing we need to focus on, not necessarily the job market. Back to you, to see what you make of that.
No, I think you're right. And I think that the change in how we learn has to not just be limited to our sort of formative years at schools and universities, but it needs to be introduced to organizations as well, because fundamentally a good employee, a good team member now is one who is curious, who keeps learning. We talked about headmasters and students in our last conversation. I think the emphasis now, everybody is a student. And I'll say it again, if you think you're a headmaster, your day is done. If you're not learning, if you're not actively unlearning things, learning new things, and learning how to learn, I think you're going to fall by the wayside and be overtaken by 20-year-old kids who are just racing past you.
Another book, Deep Utopia from Nick Bostrom. So much of the conversation is, when AI takes over, what will humans do? Is there a resurgence of creative renaissance? Right, all this. Do we embrace poetry and ballet?
TikTok.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, all of us become influencers. I almost wonder if that's the wrong framing, because it looks like at first there was humans, then there's AI and humans, and then there's AI and humans are like somewhere off on the side. I wonder if right now the way that we look at our lives is we are born, and then we have this whole chunk of time that is school and knowledge building. And then from the point that we're like 20, 21, 22, whatever, maybe 18, you apply that knowledge. Now I wonder if you take somebody's life and you take a sliver of it. So 10% of your entire life is always school. So you always think that there is a level of school, but also from the point that you are 4 years old or whatever it is, you are, I'll say, quote unquote, working, because working could be painting for a child.
Yes.
Maybe you are creating something that others can consume. I don't know what that would mean. I just wonder if there's a complete rethink of how we live life, going back to that need to unlearn.
Yeah, that's an amazing thought. That I think about it now is, I started coding when I was about 10. If I was to put myself up against my 10-year-old self with the same tools, am I any better than that child? I've got a lot of contextual wisdom that's come from learning things along the way, but am I any more creative or innovative? Would the output be any better, really?
I would argue you're probably less innovative, right? If you look at so many, whether it's musicians or people who are in the arts or people who are doing mathematics, it feels like there's this peak of creativity. Now, I know that there are numbers out there that it's like in your 20s, right? Like 23 to 29 or something.
Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo were not old people.
Yeah. And I don't know if that's because of some sort of peak in the brain or intellect or knowledge growth, or if it's because at a certain point your neural pathways become hardened into how you think. And that's why people start to turn to things like mushrooms or LSD and microdosing, or you go to Burning Man because you are trying to seek this way to reshape what you know in this drive for continuous knowledge?
So I think it's been proven that we don't necessarily have hardening of neuroplasticity later in life. However, we stagnate or we allow it to happen because we don't actively keep learning. So we're pushed to learn at younger ages, but as we get older and we get lazy, tired, I don't know, we stop actively learning.
I'll push back on the lazy or tired thing. I wonder if it's a sense of embarrassment. There's a great comment that I heard that was like, most people never get good at anything because they never want to be bad at it.
Yeah, okay.
And as I mentioned in the last couple of weeks, I've started Muay Thai, and it is embarrassing to me because you'll see like kids who just pick it up, and I'll think, I'm doing this week after week after week. I'm doing this for an hour a day, and it's stupid to think this way because I know people train their entire lives on this, but I'm like, when I throw a hook, my elbow is still down and not up. Yeah. And I'm like, the instructor must have told me this 100 times and I can't learn it. But I will say the embarrassment to me is what makes me want to stop, not the energy, not the exhaustion, not the money, not the pain for it.
You don't be bad at something.
I feel embarrassed. And that is the dumbest reason to stop. But I also think that's why most people, especially as they get older, never progress or extend. And that's why when you're younger, when you're 5 years old, you don't care about being embarrassed. You'll go in there and like taekwondo, karate, guitar, violin. You're like, oh, I'm going to screw everything up. It doesn't matter. Right. But now in my 40s, when I have some like 20-year-old kid walk in and watching me one-on-one with the instructor looking like an idiot, even though I don't know that person, there's no reason I should be embarrassed. You're like, oh, like I don't want to do this again. It is crazy to think to myself, it matters to me more being embarrassed in front of someone I don't know than being punched in the face. Yeah. That's a shocking thing when I say it out loud.
I empathize with that because I go to the gym a lot, as we both do. Comparison is the thief of joy. And I'm walking into a gym with some massive 20 and 30-year-olds looking up and going, I've got so far to go. I'll probably never get there. At the age I am now, I will probably never get to where they are. But I think you've got to do a lot of these things for yourself, for your own reasons. And when you start looking at what does somebody else think of me, it's easier to say this than to do it. But I think that's where it gets challenging. What you said, though, was do we find it harder the older we get? I think there's a little bit of embarrassment. I think there's a little bit of complacency as well to say, I'm 40 years old, I'm 50 years old, I don't need to learn anymore, I'm not at school anymore, I've built my time, I've done my time, I've learned my chops, I've got wisdom to give to the world. I think there's a bit of that, and I think it's hard, it's humbling to say, actually all that knowledge I've built, maybe only 30% of it is now relevant, and the rest of it has moved on.
That's a really good point. So it's that ability to be humble. When I think of great leadership, that's so often what is associated with it is the ability to be humble. But that's also why I think so few people ever become great leaders. And when I think about all this stuff with AI coming, if that's a skill we need to have, how do we get people to change that? How do we get people to embrace that? Because it is oftentimes counter to just, I think people, humans, the same embarrassment. If I were humble about something, I would never be embarrassed. There's no reason to be embarrassed. Yeah. It's a dumb thing and it reflects on me. So I do think there is a level of complacency, but I do wonder if that is driven by the fact that I don't want to be embarrassed at its core. Because I can sit here and say, I've put in my time, I've learned these things. Is what you're really saying is I don't want to go back to where I look like a beginner. I look like a noob because that is embarrassing. And for some reason, instead of saying that's a better path in life, that's a more interesting path, like you just get fearful of saying that. And so if we go back to your questions at first of organizations transforming, and how do you have organizations or teams or companies transform, is the first thing to develop a culture of humbleness or a culture of embarrassment. And that's okay. That embarrassment is find that you shouldn't be embarrassed?
I like that. And I think that we carry with us this fear of failure constantly. I think I see lots of organizations talking about the whole, we want to move fast and break things from Facebook. We want to take risks. We want people to feel like they can take risks. I've seen very few organizations which actively encourage people to take risks, and when they fail, don't jump up and down on them. I think we want to build environments where people play, stay curious, play, take risks, and fail, and then learn from those failures. But that's very easy to say, and it's very easy in organizations which are revenue driven, which are growth driven, to say we want to create the space to allow people to do that and carry the associated costs because it's expensive.
That goes so much back to the founder mode versus a typical CEO. Right? You have these companies that are still with their founders, and they can go off and take these ridiculous bets because the founders still control most of the company. Yep. So they can go off and take ridiculous bets. They can be embarrassed. Look, you want to make fun of Meta for renaming things and creating the metaverse, right? You want to make fun of Amazon for the Fire Phone and all of these things. At the same time, without that ability to take those risks and say it's okay, they wouldn't have found the other things that worked. I remember when when Facebook at the time, named Facebook, acquired WhatsApp. All of my friends in the US were laughing at it because to them, nobody knew what WhatsApp was. In the US, WhatsApp was not really a thing. It was outside of the US. And people were like, this is the dumbest move ever. No, not necessarily. When they copied Snapchat, everybody got upset at them. It's like you are able to take these risks because you are in this founder mode. You are able to be embarrassed, and that's okay. And actually, the people who are taking these risks, like again, Zuckerberg, Bezos, whoever it is, they're not embarrassed because they know that's the only way that you are ever going to succeed and change. That if you do not take those risks, if you are not willing to quote unquote be embarrassed, you are going to die.
Yes. Google's a great example of it. How many thousands of Google projects there are that never see light of day. And Google Glass was a hilarious example of something which people mocked and said was never going to work. But you look at where we are now with glasses, and none of those would have happened without Google Glass.
That's why I go back to the whole Horizon thing from Meta. I think that's still a cool idea. Is it just too early? And I don't know, but the fact that that company is building those skills, that they tried different things, yeah, sure, maybe it was a gigantic failure at that time. Does that not mean that some of what they learned, they cannot apply other places? I don't know. I don't work at Meta, but people seem to judge things on a very narrow band. And it just seems, again, it goes back to that. It's very easy to judge things. It's very hard to do things.
So what does success look like as well? I think if you say that something's a failure because it didn't achieve multi-million-dollar sales, then perhaps it is a failure. But if you think about it, is it a successful step on the journey towards that final end product? Actually, maybe it's a huge success.
Yeah, and that's a great point, right? Again, is the knowledge that you gained on that. So when it comes back to going back to your question of that transformation, you have all these tools. If I go back to last week, we talked about Sapient building Slingshot, this internal tool that is a product development platform using Gen AI. Even if the company fails at that, right? It is the knowledge that was built up is worth more probably than the product itself. And so if that product fails, I'm sure like you're going to have 70 or 80% of the company saying, oh, see, it was always going to fail. And you're like, but if you never took that step, the entire company was going to die.
Yeah.
And now I was one of those people, right? But now in the past, let's say, since starting my own company and having to navigate that, you recognize so much more the value in those risks, the value in trying to transform, but also how difficult it is to bring along thousands of people when you transform, especially thousands of people who don't want to necessarily be embarrassed, are very proud of their knowledge and their skills. And you have to create now an entire new culture. When Satya Nadella took over Microsoft, I remember there was this whole thing where he pushed the culture to be, what was it? It was like a know-it-all to a learn-it-all.
Yes.
And Microsoft was famous for being, we're the smartest people in the room. And when Satya came on, it was like, we need to be lifelong students. We need to embrace this idea of humbleness and always learning. It's probably what's kept them successful. And if you look at Microsoft, litany of failed products, but they're still on top. And they've made some great movements, and everyone will laugh at them for, oh, you failed at mobile. Yeah, they've made a lot more successes than they have failures.
For sure. I think you've made the point previously that AI is not just coming, AI is here. And if you're not embracing it, then you've got real problems. But I think the fact that any company that is choosing to advise their clients at this point about how to effectively use AI by actively doing is already well on the way. I've just joined Wong Doody, part of Infosys, and I'm really pleased by the fact that we've got real practical AI applications that we're bedding into everything we do, that we work closely with IBM Watson. That real engagement is what will make us successful. And I think anybody who's not doing that needs to look at how do they take those initial steps to get to real, stop the talk is cheap, how do you get to doing fast?
I think that's where we're going to wrap up. We're out of time, but it has been a great conversation, and I'll see you next week.
Sounds good.